What is up, guys? Well, I am back in Austin, Texas for the third year in a row checking out Fantastic Fest. And last night on day one of the festival, we got the world premiere of Terrifier 3. Certainly one of my most anticipated movies of the year, and I think goes without saying the most hyped horror release of 2024 by a landslide. As a lot of you guys know, I was able to check out the premiere of Terrifier 2 a couple of years ago at the same festival. I absolutely loved that movie. I have seen it numerous times since, and I had a lot of hype for this third one, wondering where they were going to go next, how are they going to continue to push things forward, push the boundaries, move the lore and the characters into interesting places. And whenever they announced it was going to have a Christmas setting, I got even more excited because while there aren't too many great ones in my opinion, I do love the idea of Christmas horror. But I did have a few concerns. One, I wasn't sure if they were eventually going to get to the point where they push things too far. You know, what boundaries are they going to cross that might be too much for me or some others? And then as well as the info that Damien has been given a lot over the last number of months, saying that he's trying to take this movie back more to the approach and the tone of the first film, where the second film was much more fantastical, a lot more supernatural, a lot more wild and weird. Wanted to bring it back more to that grounded, gritty reality of that first film. And I wasn't sure where that balance was going to lie with this one. And I gotta say, yesterday from top to bottom was just a wild day. We started off on the red carpet. I got to meet Halle Berry for the premiere of Never Let Go, and then all the Terrifier 3 people came in, and there was a ton of them. Got to meet, for the second time, Damien, and I also get to interview him very briefly. Finally got to meet Lauren Rivera, which was absolutely awesome. Certainly the highlight of the day for me. I have loved that woman ever since the second one. We've talked numerous times on the internet. She's been a guest on my channel, so that was absolutely the highlight of the day for me. All right. Oh.
Yo,
how you doing?
Nice to meet you in person.
Yes. Got me hyped up and got me pumped for this premiere. It was an absolute packed house. I was sitting like 3 rows in front of Mike Flanagan. I mean, these festivals, when you get to go to these premieres, I mean, they're just a wild experience. There's so much about it that is so cool and just creates a memory that you will have for your entire life. So it was absolutely a fun day. But does Terrifier 3 deliver? So starting off with the positives for Terrifier 3, I actually really liked the tonal balance that they brought to this one. Definitely bridging the first film with the second film. Still having a lot of that lore, still having a lot of that crazy zaniness and the supernatural edge, and a lot of the mythical element to the story that they're bringing in here, while definitely having a bit more of that darker tone, that darker edge, and a lot more of that visual grit from the first film. So I think if you're a fan of the first one that maybe didn't like how far things were pressed in the second film, this one is actually going to be a lot more enjoyable for you. And if you're somebody who much preferred the second film, it's not so much of a return to the first that you lose a lot of those newer elements that you liked in 2. To me, they did strike that perfect balance. When I was interviewing Damien, he basically compared it to saying the Terrifier 2 was kind of like his Dream Warriors, but he didn't want to keep pressing forward too far into that direction. Wanted to make sure he kept that tether to the tone of the original film. And I was actually relieved at how much of that Dream Warriors element was still present in this movie.
Because I feel like part 2 was sort of my Dream Warriors, where it became more poppy and more fantastic, especially with the fantasy element. Yeah. But I didn't want to make that mistake of now going too far in that direction. I wanted to reel it in and go back to what everybody sort of liked about art in the first place, which was that grittier grindhouse vibe. So this may be the darkest and most disturbing one, believe it or not, but it still very much has the tone of part 2, just the bigger scope, and we're following obviously Sienna and the lore that we set up. So I think it's the perfect blend, the perfect marriage of 1 and 2.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is you made Dream Warriors, but we don't want to head towards Freddy's Dead.
Correct. Yeah, I want to go back to Nightmare on Elm Street, the original now, if I can. Yeah,
awesome. Yeah. They also found a really good balance of answering a number of the questions and a number of the lore-related mystery of the second film, while also leaving a lot of things dangling, leaving a lot of questions still unanswered, leaving a lot of things still to be developed and to be explored in further films. I don't think it's any secret whatsoever that they certainly have plans for the future of this franchise. This is not stopping anytime soon, and that was a relief for me, because as much as I loved 2, that movie raised more questions than it answered, and I felt like this one had, again, a nice balance. You're going to hear that word a lot in this review. You have a lot of things from the second film regarding Sienna's father and some of the nature of how art is so supernatural and how things tie to the little girl and Vicky. And there's a number of those questions that we start to get a little more context for how that works and what exactly the explanation is, without giving you everything. And I thought it was a satisfying amount. Like, I'm still foaming at the mouth to understand a lot of these things, but I wasn't walking out frustrated that I didn't find out more than what they gave me in the third film. David Howard Thornton as Art the Clown is still finding so many different ways to make art so sadistic and so terrifying, but very funny. Like, every single thing that they do in here, like, it's still striking that Art the Clown personality that we love, but they're still finding new ways to do it. It doesn't retread any of the visual gags or the sight gags or the even just some of the facial expressions that we see in the first two films. They find new ways to do it. Like, there's a scene in here where Art meets Santa that was absolutely hilarious without needing any dialogue whatsoever from David Howard Thornton. And that's kind of the magic of Art. You know, I'm somebody that always gravitates more towards the charismatic killers, my Freddy, my Chucky, and Art is like that weird balance of having the silent stalker like a Michael Myers and a Jason, but he has all the personality and all of that dark humor of the slashers that I love. And so I think it's impressive how much they're still finding in ways to bring Art the Clown to life and put him in new situations and make him still so like gleefully sadistic in ways that we haven't seen before. One more thing I wanted to add really quick. The character of Vicky gets a really cool expansion in this movie. I've never really been able to figure out exactly what her place is going to be in the story of these films. You know, she's somebody that is introduced in the first film as kind of the opener and the closer. She gets kind of the same treatment in the second film where she pops up at the end. In here, she gets much more of an integral role. And I think for some people, she's even going to steal the thunder from Art the Clown in a lot of ways. So if you have been curious or a little bit, you know, on the fence about how you feel about the Vicky character, be prepared for some interesting surprises with her in this film. Lauren Levera absolutely kicked major ass as Sienna in this third film, and I love her as an actress. She's one of those people that I will absolutely champion and root for until I am off this earth. She's just such a great person and just is such a talented actress that I want to see what she's going to continue to do with her career. But as this character that in just one movie planted her flag as one of the most iconic final girls of all time with that presence that she brought in just the first performance as Sienna, you get a really interesting evolution in this third film. You get a lot more of a vengeful, a lot more of a dark-edged, and more of an unhinged version of the character here. She's going through some of that survivor's guilt and a lot of the trauma, which I admit I was a little worried. I was like, that's kind of a trope. We see that a lot with final girls, whether it be Sydney, whether it be Laurie Strode. Like, we always get to that second chapter and it's all about the trauma. Like, what are we going to do differently here to not just have it be kind of a quintessential second showing of a final girl? And they find some really interesting ways to just push her into this unhinged territory that you don't often see final girls go.
Even Sienna is a culmination of so many final girls that I love, like Laurie, Sydney, Ripley is a big one, and one of my favorites that we didn't really discuss, Damien and I, is Mia Allen from the Evil Dead franchise, and she definitely goes through a lot of guilt. She goes through a lot in the 2013 movie. And I'd say they all influenced, especially probably Mia the most, because she's a bit unhinged in that movie, and I get to be a bit unhinged in here, so I'm very excited about that, and hopefully it translated well.
We'll see. I love that movie, so I'll be able to see if it's there or not.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know.
So just from a performance standpoint, all throughout the film, I thought she was incredible as far as evoking somebody that's going through trauma, that's going through sadness, that's going through that survivor's guilt, that's trying to hold herself together even though she is absolutely shattered from the inside out. And then as you move into the third act, when you finally get, you know, Sienna versus Art yet again, you get a lot of kick-ass action. I mean, she just brings it as far as the stunt work and as far as having a final girl, much like Sidney Prescott, that's like, fuck this shit, I'm fighting back. So you better be ready, Art. I'll also say one of the main concerns that I've seen a lot of people have is Terrifier 3 going to be as long as Terrifier 2? Now, Terrifier 2 was kind of like a Zack Snyder's Justice League situation to me, where they did a lot of crowdfunding for that. There was a lot of fan support that got that movie made. So when we actually got the final cut of that film, they just gave us the extended cut. They gave us the monstrous cut that normally you would have to wait years for some special edition Blu-ray. It was like 2 hours and 20 minutes long. And for a lot of people, that was way too long. And for me, it may be slightly too long. I still enjoyed it, but it was a long experience for what these slasher movies, especially something like Terrifier, typically brings. Terrifier 3 I thought was much better paced. It's not as long as 2, but I thought they used their runtime very well. At no point does it feel like we're diving too much into something, or things are going on a little too long, or we're taking too long to get to the next kill scene or the next scene with Sienna. It's a very well-paced movie. Things kick off immediately, and it never really lets up until the end, and at no point does it feel like we're extending past the natural runtime of what this movie should be. Possibly my favorite element of this movie on the first watch, which actually surprised me, was that Damien was able to create this vintage Christmas aesthetic. It doesn't look like 2024 Christmas. It has this very late 80s, early 90s vintage vibe to it, with just the look of the decorations, with the look of how they go to malls and sit on Santa's lap, and the lights, the decorations, everything. It has this old school look to it that I absolutely loved, because it created this unexpected nostalgia for me. Like, it made Christmas look the way that I remember it looking as a kid, because it's very different. What you looked at Christmas as a kid versus what it looks like now. Everything's very corporate. You walk into Target and they got Christmas decorations out in the middle of August. And there was just something very cool and vintage and nostalgic about the way that they painted this movie with the Christmas holiday that I found to be so enjoyable. And just in and of itself, setting this in Christmas was a really cool idea, pulling Art the Clown out of the Halloween aesthetic into what is supposed to be the happiest time of the year for most of us. And it brought a really fun element here. And I love how they incorporated the Christmas holiday and some of the Christmas lore into the kills, which is something that when you have a holiday slasher, that's one of my favorite elements, just like Thanksgiving from not too long ago, when you can incorporate the gore and the carnage with some of that holiday cheer and some of the holiday elements that we all know and love. That's a lot of fun. And finally, of course, you knew this was coming, the gore, the carnage candy. Holy shit. This is one of those elements that I still continue to be shocked, surprised, and impressed at how they're able to continue to evolve and push things further and go even gorier and even nastier and even more high concept with the kills here. I don't think there's anything in here that's quite as sadistic for me as the bedroom scene in the second film. That's something that a lot of people are gonna ask, like, did they top that scene? For some, the shower scene might top it. But for me, what was interesting about this third film was not necessarily that it topped the bedroom scene on a sadistic level, but throughout the runtime of the movie, I felt this one, there were way more quantity of kills, and the kills felt like a lot more individual set pieces. Like, there's nobody that's, for the most part, just kind of quickly dispensed of. There's no scenes where we're just getting a lot of cannon fodder just to rack up the body count. Like, every single person gets their moment that gets killed here, and they find new, nasty, disgusting ways to just make somebody's life an absolute hell for that 2 minutes that they're with Art the Clown. And so, yeah, I mean, you walk into a Terrifier film expecting that, wanting that, and if you're gonna ask me, do they deliver that yet again in 3? Oh yeah, they deliver it in spades. Buckets and buckets and buckets of blood. And I can't praise the special effects work enough. Like, I am one of those people that loves and values practical effects work, using latex and rubber and everything to make everything look as real as possible. That's always been one of Damien's biggest strengths, whether he's in the Terrifier franchise or he's lending his work over to stream. And again, continues to deliver just absolutely mind-blowing effects here. It almost is hard to believe that they haven't just gotten volunteers that are willing to be actually massacred on camera, and we're not watching some version of a snuff film with how real this shit looks. Moving on to the mixed elements, Going along with what I just said with how far they're able to push things with the gore and the kills, this is a movie that definitely aims to continue to cross boundaries, to continue to look at things that are supposed to be taboo, that are, we say are lines you can't cross, and they gleefully, with a twisted smile, cross those lines. And I do think for some, it might go too far. This might be the Terrifier movie that turns off a few people. I don't think it's going to be the majority, but I think there's going to be a few that say, okay, there's a few things I did not want to see Art the Clown do, and he does in this movie. And typically, I would be in that group because there's certain things that I don't like to see, even as much as I love a carnage candy-fueled movie. But for me, the way that they did it here, the execution, without saying too much, actually made it where I could enjoy it. It made it where it was not a deal breaker. It made it where it pushes the boundaries, but it doesn't do it in like this extremely distasteful way that kind of just puts a bad taste in my mouth. I think they were very wise about what they show, about what they kind of convey on screen, what they imply is happening versus what they actually show happening on screen. And I was relieved that they had the foresight to do that. They knew they wanted to cross some lines, but they didn't want to do it in a point where they're just like absolutely going to lose some audience members. There's still going to be a few, but luckily I was not one of them. I was still able to really enjoy how far they pushed things in this movie. Moving on to the negatives, I really only have two, and they're both character-based. One, you have Elliot Fulham's character of Jonathan. You have Sienna's younger brother. He gets a much smaller role in this film than I was hoping for, because in the second film, he's very much the innocent younger brother that Sienna has to protect. I mean, you get that great scene where she literally throws herself on top of him while Art is just slashing her with the whips at the end of the second film. And I was kind of hoping, though they didn't promise this, I was hoping that Jonathan would get more of a sizable role in this one, that he would be able to kind of grow as a character and maybe like get a little bit of that Sienna edge to him and actually rise above being more the victim and the survivor in this film. And it didn't quite go that direction. And so that was just a slight disappointment for me. Again, nothing that they promised. I didn't watch any of the trailers, but this wasn't anything that they were really building up in the pre-release notes or any of the press stuff that they were doing, but just something that I wanted to see personally as a growth of that character from 2 that we didn't quite get here. And the only other thing is that there is a character in this movie who is a true crime podcaster that I totally get what they were going for, because there are absolutely people out there that are just so ignorant and are so blind to how insensitive that they are being, that are trying to like make celebrity out of victims and are trying to bleed these people who have had these horrible, traumatic, horrifying experiences for views. That's absolutely a thing. But I felt that she was a bit annoying. Like, it was almost like they laid it on too thick. She was so overbearing in her ignorance and in her like gleeful insensitivities that I just hated her character. And maybe that was the purpose, maybe it was something that they really wanted you to despise her for what that character represents, and they do a great job of that if that was the intention. But sometimes there's a line where you can meet what you're going for and making us dislike a character, and sometimes you can go too far where her presence is actually kind of just annoying on screen. And I felt that we got a little bit over that line with this character in Terrifier 3. And my box light died. The things you deal with when you're off location. Anyway, guys, overall, if you're a fan of Terrifier 1 or Terrifier 2, I think you're going to enjoy this film. This might even be your favorite if you wanted to have a blend of those two films. They continue to push things forward with how far it goes with the gore and how much they're able to do with their practical effects. They're able to push things forward with the lore and with the character arcs in a way that I thought was very satisfying and still leaving a lot to be answered in the future that I'm salivating for. And I absolutely loved the vintage Christmas aesthetic. So if you've been waiting for this film, get excited, because you're going to have one hell of a treat here in a couple of weeks for a continuing October tradition or even a new Christmas classic, which we can never have too much of those. So if you enjoy the Terrifier films, you will enjoy Terrifier 3. Well, that is it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put my review of Terrifier 2 up here for you to check out. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future and everything else that's going to come out of Fantastic Fest this year. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.